I had always thought of life as a stage play, with each of us cast in roles we rarely chose for ourselves. My role had been that of a devoted husband, a successful architect, and, as of 3 months ago, a dying man. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, AAE sentence. Not a diagnosis. They gave me a year, but I knew better. When the doctors uttered those cruel words, I turned to my wife, Claire, seeking comfort. But her grip on my hand was loose, her eyes distant. In hindsight, that moment had been the beginning of the end. It started with whispers, suspicious late-night texts, business trips that didn't make sense, the scent of cologne that wasn't mine. But I was too exhausted from chemotherapy and pain to investigate. Or perhaps I didn't want to know. That changed when I hired Ethan, my longtime friend and private investigator. I told him to be discreet. I expected a slow burn, a drawn-out reveal. Instead, within a week, he had damning evidence. Photos of Claire wrapped around a man I once called my best friend, Daniel, a colleague, a drinking buddy, the godfather, to our child. Betrayal isn't like a gunshot. It's a slow knife sliding between your ribs, but I didn't confront her. No, I was far too patient for that. Instead, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband. I held her at night, pretended not to notice the perfume that wasn't hers. I even told her my final wish was to update my will, to make sure she and our daughter, Emily, would be taken care of when I was gone. Claire, to her credit, didn't argue. Perhaps she thought guilt had softened me. Perhaps she thought I was too weak to fight back. She was wrong. The rewrite. The new will was drafted with meticulous precision. Claire received nothing, not the house, not the savings, not a single cent. Instead, everything went into a trust for Emily, protected from Claire's greedy hands. But the final stroke of genius, a sealed letter attached to my will, to be opened by my lawyer upon my passing, it contained everything. The affair, the lies, the betrayal, evidence from Ethan, laid out like a trial verdict. I made sure the funeral would be grand. Claire would stand before my casket, weeping crocodile tears, expecting the financial windfall that would never come. And then, the lawyer would read my letter before the gathered mourners. The moment would be biblical, but fate, as always, had a sense of humor. The twist one evening, weeks before my final act could unfold, Claire returned home, face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. She hesitated before speaking, and when she did, her voice trembled. "Daniel, he's dead. A car accident. Fast. Brutal." I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something else. Suspicion. Ethan had been too quiet lately, and when I called him that night, he didn't answer. I searched his reports again. Buried within the surveillance photos was a minor detail I had overlooked. Daniel had started growing uneasy. He wasn't just seeing Claire. He had been meeting with someone else, a lawyer. My stomach twisted. What if Daniel had planned to expose Claire? First, what if he had been rewriting his own will, ensuring his fortune didn't land in her hands? And what if someone had silenced him before he could? That night, as Claire slept beside me, I stared at her. I had always assumed she was the traitor in my story. But what if she was something far worse? What if all along I had been married to a murderer? I smiled. The stage was set, but the final act was no longer mine to write. The end. The revelation sat in my chest like a slow-burning fire. I had thought I was the one pulling the strings, orchestrating my revenge with careful precision. But what if Claire had been playing the long game too? For the next few days, I observed her. Every move, every expression. She mourned Daniel publicly, but something about it felt off. Her grief was well rehearsed, the perfect blend of sorrow and restraint. Not once did she mention love. Not once did she break down in private, and then came the moment that sealed my suspicions. One evening, as she thought I was asleep, Claire crept out of bed, phone in hand. From the shadows of the hallway, I watched her dial a number. "It's done," she whispered. A pause. A sigh. "No, the police won't dig too deep. They'll think it was an accident." Another pause. "He can't know. Not yet." The fire in my chest erupted into an inferno. I wasn't the only one rewriting fates. The setup. The next morning I called Ethan, or at least I tried. His number was disconnected. Gone. Claire moved through the house as if nothing had changed, bringing me tea, kissing my forehead, playing the devoted wife. "You seem distant," she murmured over dinner that night. "Just tired," I said, forcing a weak smile. "The treatments—" She squeezed my hand, her touch feather-light. "I know, my love. Just rest. I'll take care of everything." And that was the problem. I had to act fast. The counterplay, I went to my lawyer under the guise of finalizing my will. But instead, I did something more drastic. I created a secondary will, hidden from Claire's knowledge. This one included a confession detailing my murder. I wrote it all out. My suspicions. The affair. Daniel's convenient death. The hushed phone call, and then I left instructions for a third party, a separate investigator, one even Ethan didn't know about. If anything happened to me under mysterious circumstances, this second will would surface, ensuring an investigation that no amount of bribery could bury. It was my final insurance policy. The Trap A week passed, then 2. Claire continued her charade, unaware that I had set a ticking clock beneath her feet. And then, the real test. One night, I deliberately left my medication bottle out, making sure she saw it. I even accidentally spilled a few pills, watching her from the corner of my eye as she picked them up. I waited. A day later, my nausea worsened. My vision blurred. My body weakened beyond what the cancer should have caused. And that's when I knew. She was poisoning me. The unraveling. Played along, growing weaker by the day, letting her believe I was nearing my end. But behind the scenes, I made one final move. I called the police, and I told them my wife was trying to kill me. The night before the authorities arrived, Claire sat beside my bed, brushing a hand through my hair. "Sleep, my love," she whispered, slipping something into my tea. I took a slow sip, feeling the bitter tang of crushed pills dissolve on my tongue. And then I whispered back, "I know what you did." Her eyes flickered. Just for a second, a moment of calculation, but then she smiled. "What are you talking about?" I placed my hand over hers, my grip frail but firm. "You'll find out soon enough." The fall the next morning, the police arrived. With a warrant, and they weren't just investigating Daniel's death, they had my second will, the confession, the pills, everything. Claire never saw it coming. I watched from my hospital bed as they led her away, her face frozen in a mixture of shock and fury. I had spent months preparing my revenge, thinking I was simply punishing a cheating wife. But, in the end, I had uncovered something far darker. And now, as the police car disappeared down the street, I let out a slow, exhausted breath. I wasn't sure how much time I had left, but for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. Claire was in handcuffs, my will had sealed her fate, and justice had been served. But life, as I had come to learn, was never so simple. The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. "You need to come in," he said, his voice tense. Now, I barely had the strength to make the trip, but something in his tone told me this wasn't something I could ignore. When I arrived, he slid a folder across his desk. This was filed 2 days ago. I opened it. Inside was a will, my will, only I hadn't written this one. The ghost in the machine. This isn't mine, I said, flipping through the pages. No, my lawyer agreed, but it has your signature, notarized, witnessed. I stared at the document. In this version, Claire did inherit everything, the house, the savings, even my life insurance payout. The trust for Emily was still there, but Claire had full control. Oh. Pulse pounded in my ears. How? She must have had a forgery prepared, he said grimly, in case you ever turned on her. I felt a slow, creeping chill in my bones. Claire had known. She had known I was planning something. She had. Been ahead of me the entire time. She can't use this, I said. She's in custody. My lawyer hesitated. About that? He slid a second folder forward. Inside was a bail receipt. Claire had walked free this morning. I barely heard the rest of his words. The charges were weak. Not enough evidence. On Daniel. The poisoning allegations are circumstantial. She was out, and she had the real will, the one she wanted. The noose I thought I had tightened around her neck had vanished. Claire had won. The reckoning. That night I returned home. To an empty house. But it didn't feel empty. It felt watched. I moved carefully, my breath slow and measured. The lights flickered. The wind outside howled. Then, a creak. The front door clicked shut. She was here. I turned, and there she stood, wearing a black dress, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked like a widow in waiting. Hello, darling, she purred. Gripped the edge of the table. You're supposed to be in jail, she smiled. You're supposed to be dead. Checkmate Claire stepped closer, running a manicured nail along the wooden table. You really thought you were clever, didn't you? I didn't answer. I was too busy noticing the knife in her hand. I did love you once, she admitted. But you became an inconvenience. She sighed, shaking her head. And now you're a liability. She lunged. I had no time to think, only to react. Twisted away as the knife slashed the air where my throat had been a second ago. She was fast. But desperation made me faster. I grabbed a lamp and swung. Glass shattered. Claire staggered back, dazed. I didn't wait. I ran. The final play, I didn't stop until I reached my car, until I sped away from the house that had once been my home, my sanctuary. I knew then. Claire wouldn't stop, not until I was buried 6 feet under. I had tried to outmaneuver her, tried to win with paper and ink, with logic and justice, but Claire didn't play by those rules. So now, neither would I. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival, and I wasn't done fighting yet. I didn't go to the police. I knew how that would play out. Claire was too smart, too slippery. She'd lie, cry, and walk away clean. Again. No, this wasn't about justice anymore. This was about ending it. I needed to set a trap. The setup, I drove all night, my body screaming in pain. The cancer was winning, but I refused to let it take me before Claire did. By sunrise, I was at the one place she'd never expect me to go. Daniel's old cabin in the woods. It had been his sanctuary, his hideaway from the world. Claire had always hated it. Too isolated, too simple. That's what made it perfect. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Cameras, a burner phone, a few welcome home surprises. Then I made the call. I dialed Claire's number, my voice weak, broken. You win, I rasped. I have nothing left. A deep breath. If you want the house, the money, everything, come get it. Silence. Then, soft laughter. Oh, darling, she murmured, you really are pathetic. Click. She was coming. The last supper night fell. Rain drummed against the cabin roof as headlights cut through the trees. She stepped inside, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. "You look awful," she mused. "Not long now, is it?" I ignored the jab. "Drink?" I gestured to the whiskey bottle on the table. Claire smirked. "You think I'd drink anything you poured?" "Smart," I admitted. I poured myself a glass instead, took a slow sip. Let her see it was safe. She hesitated, then poured her own. I waited until she took a sip before I spoke. "I know about the forged will." Her hand stilled. "Just for a second." "You're delusional," she said smoothly. "Dying has made you paranoid." I leaned forward. "Then why did I send copies to the police?" Her expression barely flickered, but I saw it. The brief, deadly shift in her eyes. "You didn't," she whispered. I smiled. "Didn't I?" The final trap, her breath quickened. I could see her mind racing, calculating. Then she tilted her head, smiled. "If I go down, you go down too," she purred. "Do you think the police will believe a dying man over me?" She was right, which is why the police weren't my real audience. I nodded toward the bookshelf. "Smile for the cameras, darling." Her gaze snapped to the tiny red lights. Hidden. Cameras, blinking softly in the dim cabin. Recording. Capturing every word. For the first time, Claire looked afraid. "You?" She stepped back, her confidence cracking. "You wouldn't—" "Oh, I already did." Her fingers trembled, then clenched into fists. She lunged. I was ready. The end game. The struggle was short. My body was failing, but adrenaline gave me one last burst of strength. I twisted away, sending her sprawling across the table. The whiskey bottle shattered. She gasped as the sharp edge of broken glass sliced into her. She tried to rise, tried to reach me, but then she stopped. Her eyes widened, her breath hitched. She stared at the glass in my hand. I crouched beside her, my own strength fading fast. "I never sent the evidence to the police," I whispered. "But I did set an email timer." Her lips parted, but no sound came. 2 hours from now, everything goes public." I brushed a hand through her hair, just as she had done to me so many times before. "No more games, Claire." A final breath, and then stillness. The curtain falls. By the time the police arrived, I was slumped in my chair, barely conscious. Claire was gone. The cameras had captured everything, and the email had sent itself, right on time. The world would know the truth. And me? I had won. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion take me. I had one last role to play. The dying man who took a monster. Down with him, fade to black, the end. I woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor. The scent of antiseptic burned my nose. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I was still here, still breathing. A slow laugh bubbled in my throat. I had expected to die in that cabin, but fate had decided otherwise. A nurse entered, startled to see me awake. "Mr. Calloway," she said gently, "you're in St. Augustine General. You were found unconscious." "How long?" My voice was like sandpaper. "A week." A week. Long enough for the world to learn everything. The fall of Claire Calloway. The news played on the television in the corner. I watched through half-lidded eyes as reporters swarmed outside my house. Claire Calloway, widow of renowned architect. Henry Calloway has been found dead in an apparent struggle at a remote cabin. Authorities confirm she was under investigation for multiple crimes, including fraud, attempted murder, and the suspicious death of her lover, Daniel Henshaw. In a shocking turn, damning evidence surfaced through an anonymous email, including video footage implicating her in a plot against her late husband. Investigators are calling it one of the most chilling cases of deception in recent history. I smirked. I had pulled the final string. The unexpected visitor. The next day, My lawyer arrived. His face was unreadable as he took a seat beside my hospital bed. "You were legally dead for 2 minutes before they resuscitated you," he said. I raised a brow. "And?" He slid a folder onto my lap. "Technically, that means Claire became your legal widow before she died. Which means—" He opened the folder, revealing bank accounts, deeds, assets. I blinked. "You're telling me I inherited from Claire?" He nodded. "Everything she forged, everything she stole, it all legally passed to her before her death." He grinned. "And when she died, it all became yours again." I let out a breathless laugh. After everything, I hadn't just survived, had won everything back. The final move 3 weeks later, I sat in my new penthouse overlooking the city. My body was still weak, but my mind had never been sharper. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. Then, I pulled out my phone. One unread message. Unknown number. "You played well, Henry, but the game is never truly over." Stared at the screen. My pulse quickened. Claire was dead. "Wasn't she?" I typed back one word. "Me. Who is this?" No reply. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch. I set the phone down and poured another drink. Perhaps I had won the battle. But the war was just beginning. I stared at the message, my pulse thudding in my ears. "You played well, Henry, but the game is never truly over." Claire was dead. I knew she was dead. I had watched the life drain from her eyes in that cabin. And yet, I took another sip of whiskey, forcing myself to breathe. The message could be a prank, a sick joke from some tabloid vulture trying to cash in on the chaos. But something about it felt too personal, too calculated. The watcher in the dark, for days I tried to ignore it, but then the other things started happening. A black car idled outside my building at odd hours. Always the same one, my penthouse. Door was unlocked one night, though I knew I had bolted it. My burner phone, the one I never told anyone about, lit up with a second message. Unknown number. Did you really think she was working alone? The truth unveiled. I wasn't naive. Claire had been brilliant, ruthless. But even she couldn't have orchestrated everything by herself, the forged will, the poisoning, the way she always seemed one step ahead. Had she had help? A silent partner? A mastermind behind the mastermind? I dug through my files, searching for anything I had overlooked. And then, in an old bank statement from before my cancer diagnosis, I found it. A wire transfer. Large, untraceable. Not to Claire, but to an offshore account, an account belonging to Daniel Henshaw, and Daniel was already dead. The game begins again. The realization hit me like a hammer. Claire's affair with Daniel? That had just been the surface story. Someone else had been pulling the strings, someone more dangerous, and now that Claire was gone, they were coming for me. I turned my phone over in my hands, considering my next move. I had spent months fighting to survive, believing I was playing the final game. But now I understood. The real game had only just begun, and I wasn't about to lose. I smiled, set my drink down, and dialed a number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Henry," Ethan said. "I was wondering when you'd call." The war was on. I gripped the phone tighter. Ethan's voice was smooth, calm, too calm. "You knew," I said. A pause. Then a soft chuckle. "Of course I did. My old friend, my trusted lawyer, the man who had stood by me through my cancer diagnosis, through Claire's betrayal, through the trial and the aftermath, and he had known all along." The long con. I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. Claire wasn't the mastermind, was she? She thought she was. His voice was laced with amusement. But Claire was reckless, emotional. I had to keep her focused. I swallowed hard. You helped her. I helped you both. A cold pit formed in my stomach. Who do you think introduced her to Daniel? He continued. Who do you think made sure she had access to your accounts, your will? My fingers dug into the armrest of my chair. Why? Because you were supposed to die. The real plan. The weight of his words sank in. The cancer. My slow decline. Claire's sudden impatience. Ethan had been orchestrating everything. Claire was always impulsive, he said casually. She wanted you gone fast, too fast, but I knew it had to be gradual, natural. A pause. The cancer was a gift, really. My skin went ice cold. You wanted me to die on my own. It was cleaner that way. He sighed. You were supposed to go quietly. Claire gets the money, Daniel keeps her entertained, and I... He chuckled. I'd take my cut and disappear. I gritted my teeth. But then Claire got greedy. She got sloppy. His voice turned sharp. She panicked when she realized you weren't going quietly. Started poisoning you. Rushing things. And that's when you got suspicious. I exhaled shakily. Claire had been so close to getting away with it. But her impatience had made me fight back, and that's what had ruined everything. Now she's... dead, I said. Yes, Ethan said, which means I have a problem. The final threat. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Ethan spoke, his voice like steel. You have everything. The money, the property, the evidence tying me to all of it, I smiled. I do, he sighed. That's a shame. My gut clenched. I was hoping we could come to an understanding, Henry, he continued. But you're a loose end, and I don't leave loose ends. The call went dead. The clock starts now. I stood slowly, my body weak but my mind sharper than ever. I wasn't just hunted anymore. I was the last piece on the board. Ethan had been patient, calculated, but now he was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. I pocketed my phone and grabbed my coat. If Ethan wanted to play one last game, I'd make damn sure I was the one who finished it. Checkmate is coming. The second Ethan hung up, I knew two things. He was coming for me. I had to strike first. I had spent months fighting to survive, but now it was time to end it. The hunter becomes the hunted. I left the penthouse that night, slipping into the city's shadows. Ethan was too smart to come at me directly. He'd send someone else first, someone disposable, and sure enough, 20 minutes later, a man in a black hoodie started tailing me, sloppy, too eager. I led him into an alley, ducked behind a dumpster and waited. As soon as he passed, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Who sent you? I hissed. His eyes darted wildly. I pressed my forearm against his throat. Ethan, right? Silence. Then a slow nod. I stepped back. Good. Go tell him I'm coming. The man gasped for air and took off running. Message sent. Breaking. And entering I had one goal. Find Ethan before he found me. I knew exactly where he'd be, his law firm's private office, the one he kept off the books. It was where he handled clients like Claire. By midnight, I was inside. Ethan's desk was covered in documents, my name, my estate, even old medical records. He'd planned everything. And then I found the contract, a hit contract, on me, Ethan's fatal mistake. I heard the door open behind me. You really should have left it alone, Henry. I turned slowly. Ethan stood there, gun in hand, looking almost bored. I wanted this to be clean, he sighed. But you just had to keep playing, didn't you? I smirked. And yet, I'm still standing. For now, he cocked the gun. And that's when I dropped the real bomb. You might want to check your email, Ethan. His brow furrowed. What? Go on, I said, tilting my head. You love being in control. Check your email. He hesitated. Then, with his free hand, pulled out his phone. The moment his eyes flicked to the screen, I saw it. The panic. The video was playing. A security feed, this very office. Tonight, him, holding the gun, threatening me, sent to every major news outlet. His face turned pale. I moved. With a swift motion, I knocked the gun aside and slammed my fist into his jaw. He stumbled back, dazed. I picked up his own gun and leveled it at him. Game over, Ethan. His lips curled. You won't shoot me, I grinned. I don't have to. The knock at the door if on cue, red and blue lights flashed outside, sirens, footsteps. The police were already here. Ethan's breath hitched. I smiled. Checkmate! The door burst open. Officers stormed in. Ethan barely had time to react before they grabbed him. Ethan Langley, an officer announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud. He thrashed, eyes wild. This isn't over, Henry! He screamed. I watched as they dragged him away, and just like that, it was over. The last laugh days later, I sat on my penthouse balcony. The city sprawled beneath me. The news called it the biggest legal scandal in decades. Ethan's entire network was unraveling. Claire was gone. Ethan was finished. And me? I was still here. Still breathing. Still winning. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, raised it to the skyline, and smiled. Fiacre. King is dead, I murmured. Long live the king. I leaned back, savoring the burn of the whiskey as it slid down my throat. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to the war I had just won. Claire was gone. Ethan was in prison. The nightmare was over. Or so I thought. Then, my phone buzzed. Unknown. Number? Checkmate? Oh, Henry. You still don't see the full board? I froze. Ethan was behind bars. Claire was dead. So who the hell was texting me? I swallowed hard, my mind racing. And then, a second message. Unknown. Number. Meet me where it all began. Midnight. No police, no tricks. Or, you'll regret it. A location ping followed. I stared at the screen. The address was familiar. Too familiar. Back to the beginning. The old Callaway estate. My childhood home. A place I hadn't stepped foot in for decades. I should have ignored the message. Called the cops. Walked away. But something in my gut told me I didn't have a choice. The shadow in the dark by midnight, I was there. The mansion loomed in the darkness, its windows empty like hollow eyes. Overgrown ivy choked the stone walls. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten history. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me. Silence. Then, a slow clap echoed through the empty hall. Well done, Henry. I turned sharply, and my blood ran cold. A man stepped from the shadows, tall, well-dressed, his hair graying at the temples. His face was sharp, familiar, too familiar, because I had seen it before. The true mastermind. Father, I whispered. Richard Callaway smiled. Surprised to see me, I felt like the floor had dropped from beneath me. You're dead, I managed. You died? He chuckled. No, but I needed the world to think I was. I gritted my teeth. You orchestrated this. He nodded. Claire, Ethan, the cancer diagnosis. His eyes gleamed. It was all me. The real game, it hit me like a freight train. Claire hadn't started this game. Ethan hadn't started this game. My father had. Decades ago, he had vanished, leaving behind a legacy of wealth, power, and silence. But now he had returned to finish what he started. But why? I demanded. His smile was slow, cruel. Because you were always my greatest disappointment. A chill ran through me. All that wealth, All that power, he continued. And what did you do? Build houses? His lips curled. Pathetic. I clenched my fists. So you tried to kill me? No, Henry. He sighed. I tried to reshape you, break you down, make you ruthless. I stared at him. Ethan had been a pawn. Claire had been a pawn. I had been the real target all along. One last move, he stepped forward. But look at you now, stronger, sharper, ready to claim the throne. I felt the weight of his words. All my life, I had been running from my father's shadow. Now he was offering me his empire. Join me, Henry, he said, or be buried like the rest of them. Silence stretched between us. I took a slow breath. Then I smiled and whispered, checkmate. I reached into my pocket and pressed send. A sharp knock echoed from outside, then another. My father's smirk faded. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The front doors burst open, and the FBI stormed in. The final fall, Richard Calloway's face twisted in rage as agents swarmed him. You think this is over? He snarled as they pulled him away. I just smiled. I know it is. The last laugh. 2 weeks later, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, looking out at the city I now controlled. The Calloway name was mine again. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I had survived. I had outplayed them all, and I had won. As I took a sip of whiskey, my phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown. Number. Well played, Henry. But remember, the game never truly ends. I smirked. Maybe not. But for now, I was the king of the board. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You think you're in control, Henry? You have no idea what you've stepped into. I read the message again. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had thought everything was over. The house of cards had fallen. Richard was behind bars. Ethan was finished. Claire was long gone. The Calloway empire was mine for the taking. But now this message. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights, trying to quiet the rising panic. My mind raced. Who else? I thought I had cleared the board. I thought I was done with the game. But this was a warning. I typed a quick response, my fingers trembling slightly. Me. Who are you? The reply came instantly. Unknown number. You're not the first to think they could beat me. The first? I gripped my phone tighter, my heart pounding. I had no idea what I had just waded into. Then another message. Unknown number. It was always meant to be this way, Henry. You think you're smarter than your father? You haven't even seen the full picture. If you want to survive, you need to come with me. The darkness deepens. My breath caught. Come with me? What did that even mean? Who was behind this? I paced around my penthouse, the sense of foreboding growing. The game was never really about wealth or power. It wasn't about the Calloway legacy. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't even begun to understand. I stopped suddenly. What if Richard hadn't been the end game? What if he had been just another pawn? I sank into my chair, the implications sinking in. I had been played. And worse, I was still being played. The final meeting. There was only one way to find out who was behind it all. I looked at the message again. The address. The time. The instructions. Midnight. Abandoned warehouse on the east side. I knew where it was. I had 1 hour. The shadow in the warehouse. I arrived just before midnight, the warehouse looming like a ghost in the darkness. My footsteps echoed on the cold concrete floor. The place was a wreck, old crates, rusty metal supports, a smell of decay and forgotten things. I moved quietly through the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I heard it. The soft click of a door opening. From the shadows stepped a man, tall, thin, and dressed in a dark suit. His face was partially obscured by a mask, one that made him look like a villain out of a bad spy novel. But I didn't care about his appearance. I cared about the words he would say. "You've been following the wrong trail, Henry." I stood my ground. "Who the hell are you?" The man chuckled. "You really don't get it, do you?" He stepped forward, his shoes clicking sharply on the concrete. "All of this, the cancer, Claire, Ethan, your father's return, it was never about you. It was always about the Calloway legacy." "Then why involve me?" I demanded. "Because," the man said, his voice chilling, "you were always meant to take the fall." The shocking reveal. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Take the fall for what?" I asked, my throat dry. The man reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a file. He tossed it onto the floor between us. I crouched and opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, old faded pictures of my mother. My heart stopped. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. "You didn't know, did you?" the man asked. "Your mother wasn't just a woman caught up in your father's world. She was the key, the true mastermind behind it all." I stared at him. "You're lying." The man smiled, cold, calculating. "Oh, no. Your mother was always the one who wanted to take the Calloway empire. Your father was too weak, too distracted. But she had a vision. She knew exactly how to control everything. The world spun around me. My mother, dead for years, was behind all of it. The last move." The man straightened, his eyes gleaming with something that could only be described as satisfaction. "You see, Henry," he said, his voice low, "everything you've done, your rise, your fight, your survival, has all been part of a much larger game. And now you're in the final round. But here's the thing, you're not meant to win." "Not this time." I stepped back, my mind racing. "What do you want from me?" I demanded. The man's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You know what I want, Henry. It's simple. Your soul." The ultimate gamble. My heart thundered. Was this some kind of sick joke? And then I realized this wasn't just about survival. It was about control. It was about who could own the Calloway legacy for good. I didn't want to be a pawn in someone else's game anymore. I refused. In that moment, I made my decision. "You can't win," I said, the words coming out steady, "because I'm done being played." I turned, walking away, leaving the man and his shadowed game behind, because in the end, the only thing I needed to win was my freedom. And that was something no one could take from me. I thought I had walked away. I thought I had finally escaped the game, the manipulations, the dark web of lies that had ensnared me for so long. But as I stepped out of the warehouse, the cool night air hitting my face, I felt the weight of something, heavier than the shadows behind me. A final twist was still in play. The man had known my mother's secret. He had known everything. But there was something more. Something he had hinted at in the dim light of the warehouse, a truth I hadn't even begun to grasp. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking as I typed a quick message. "Me. What did you mean?" I stared at the screen, waiting for the reply. Seconds stretched like hours. Then it came. "Unknown number. You really thought your father was the puppet master? You think you're done with the legacy? Think again, Henry. It's always been about you. You're the one they've been playing this entire time." The last truth, I stopped in my tracks, the world around me spinning. "Me. What are you talking about?" The reply was almost instantaneous. "Unknown number. Your mother didn't just want control of the empire. She wanted to create it. She was going to reshape the entire Calloway legacy. But it wasn't about money. Not really. It was about you. What you could become. What you were always meant to be. I felt a chill race down my spine. Me. What do you mean, what I could become? The response was a single, chilling sentence. Unknown number. You're not just a Calloway, Henry. You're the heir to a much older, more dangerous legacy. One that predates your father, your mother, everything you thought you knew. My heart raced. I felt the world around me begin to close in. I was on the edge of something I couldn't yet understand, something that had been planned. Long before I was even born. The hidden truth I couldn't breathe. I needed answers. I needed to know what the hell was happening, what I had gotten myself into. Without thinking, I rushed to my car and sped toward the only place that might hold the answers. My childhood home, the Calloway estate. The mansion loomed before me as I arrived, dark and silent. The weight of my mother's legacy felt like a physical presence. I had been running from it my whole life. But now, I knew. I had no choice but to face it. I went straight to the study. It hadn't changed. The same books, the same dusty furniture, but beneath it all, I knew something was hidden here. I pulled. Opened the drawers one by one. Old papers, photos, letters, nothing out of the ordinary. Until I reached the bottom drawer. Inside was a leather-bound journal, my mother's. The moment I opened it, I knew it was the key. Her handwriting was sharp, her words cryptic. But as I flipped through the pages, I began to piece together a horrifying picture. She had been preparing me for something dark, since before I was born, a legacy of power, of control, of blood. The truth about my mother. The final entry stopped me cold. I've seen the vision. I've prepared Henry for the inheritance of the true legacy, not the one built on wealth, but on the dark powers that have been passed down through the Calloway line for centuries. It's in his blood. The others won't understand. They never will. But soon he'll take his rightful place as the head of this legacy. And when that happens, no one will stop him. I could barely process the words. Dark powers? What the hell? Was she talking about? I slammed the journal shut, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The door creaked open behind me. I spun around, heart racing. And there, standing in the doorway, was the masked man from the warehouse. His eyes gleamed through the darkness. "You're finally starting to see, aren't you, Henry?" he said, his voice low, cold. "It was never about the money, the empire, or your father's legacy. It's about what you are. The final betrayal." "What I am," I whispered. "What are you talking about?" The man stepped forward, his mask falling away. His face was familiar, but I couldn't place it. He smiled, the corners of his lips curving into something that sent a chill straight to my bones. "Your mother wasn't the only one who knew the truth, Henry. I'm a part of it too. You were always meant to take over, not just the Calloway legacy, but something much more dangerous." I felt the ground beneath me shift. No, this can't be real. "You've been following the wrong path your whole life," he said, his voice almost pitying. "Your mother wasn't crazy, Henry. She was trying to prepare you to lead the order, to become something greater than what you are now. But it's time for you to choose." I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't want any part of this." The man stepped closer, his voice growing more intense. "You don't have a choice. The legacy is yours. The order is in your blood. You'll either embrace it or you'll be consumed by it. The final choice." I took a step back, my mind racing. This was more than just a power play. It was something ancient, something uncontrollable. I stared at the man, the stranger who had revealed my deepest, most terrifying truth, and felt the ground beneath me slip away. The walls of my childhood home, which had once been a place of solace, now felt like a cage. I was no longer the man I thought I was. I wasn't just Henry Calloway anymore. I was something else, and that something was about to awaken. He stepped closer, his eyes cold and calculating, like a predator circling its prey. You've always known deep down. You felt it, didn't you? His voice was low, dangerous. The power that runs through your veins, the legacy your mother started. She didn't just leave you money. She left you the means to control everything. I swallowed hard, fighting the sickening realization that he was right. I won't be part of this, I said, my voice hoarse. But even as I said it, doubt twisted in my gut. I felt the pull of something dark stirring inside me. Something ancient, something terrifyingly real. The man laughed softly, his eyes gleaming with something between amusement and disdain. You think you have a choice? He took another step forward, his gaze fixed on me. You always did, Henry. But what you fail to understand is that it's not a matter of choice. It's about what you were born to do. I clenched my fists, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The power, the legacy. It was all true, but I wasn't ready for it. I couldn't be. I didn't want to become the monster they had all been shaping me to be. I don't want this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not my mother. I'm not my father. I am me. For a moment, silence hung between us. The man's gaze softened, but only for a split second. Then he smiled, and that smile sent an ice-cold shiver through my bones. You're wrong, Henry, he said quietly. You're more like them than you realize. You're just too blind to see it. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. The darkness awakens. My vision blurred, the room spinning. I could feel something rising within me. A force, a power that I had tried to suppress for my entire life. It was like fire in my blood, burning away the last of my resistance. My fists clenched tighter, my breath quickening. I took a step forward, staring the man down. The air between us seemed to crackle with intensity, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. You've already made your choice, the man said, his voice low and knowing. Now, you'll have to live with it. I shook my head. You don't get it. You don't control me. But even as I said it, I felt the power stirring inside me, ready to break free. The walls of the mansion, the legacy of my bloodline, it was all starting to make sense. The Calloway Empire was mine. But it wasn't just about money or power. It was about something far darker. The man's eyes narrowed, his lips curling, into a smile. We'll see about that. The final betrayal. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles on the mantelpiece. The temperature plummeted, and I could hear the faint sound of whispers. I turned, instinctively, my heart racing. But when I looked back at the man, he was gone, and in his place stood another figure. A figure I hadn't expected. A figure I couldn't believe. The return of Claire. Claire, I whispered, my voice trembling. She stood in front of me as if she had never been gone. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her smile sent a wave of cold dread through me. You thought I was dead, didn't you, Henry? Her voice was sweet, but there was a dangerous undertone. You thought I had betrayed you, but I was always a part of this, a part of your legacy. I took a step back, confusion and disbelief swirling in my mind. No, you were. I wasn't dead, Henry. I was just waiting, she said softly, her eyes gleaming. Waiting for the right moment. Why? I asked, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Why did you leave me? Claire's smile widened, her face shifting between the woman I had once loved and something much darker. I didn't leave you, Henry. I joined you. I always was a part of this. The power that you now hold. It's in my blood, too. No, I whispered. You're lying. But her smile only grew more sinister. You're part of it now, whether you like it or not. This is the legacy. This is the truth. The order runs through your veins. It's time for you to embrace it. The choice. I stood frozen, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. Was this really Claire? Had I been blind to everything? Was this the woman I had once loved, or was this something else entirely? Why now? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why reveal all of this now? Claire stepped closer, her eyes dark with power. Because it's time, Henry. The world isn't ready for what you are going to become. But I've been waiting for this moment my entire life. You've always been the key. I felt a surge of anger and fear flood through me. I don't want this. I refuse to become like you.